Welcome. When it's starting to pop in, we're gonna wait a few minutes for everyone to join us, but just want to welcome everyone while we get started. We're gonna get started in just a few while people start to roll in. Okay, well, starting off, so hi everyone. Welcome to Indigenous Communities, Technology, and the Future of Work. My name is Jessica Santana, and I am the co-founder and CEO of America on Tech. America on Tech is a national nonprofit organization whose mission is to decrease the racial wealth gap by increasing equitable pathways for underestimated students into degrees and or careers in technology. Since 2014, we worked with more than 3,500 students in New York and Los Angeles. And today we're really happy to bring you a live discussion with some really amazing women who we're very lucky to have as panelists and who are hailing from all different professional spheres, tribes, and even countries. So I'd like to start by giving our viewers a sense of the remarkable diversity amongst these very accomplished women. First, we have Robin, who is Mohican Nation Stockbridge Munsee Band, and she's an activist, creative, filmmaker, storyteller, technologist, and organizer of the first Collegiate American Indian Hackathon, among many other things, which she'll share in a few. We also have Mina, who is a member of the Ojibwe Nation, and she's currently transforming culture and promoting diversity, equity, and inclusion in the corporate consulting world as a global employee resource group program lead at Avanade. We also have Tania, who hails from La Guajira, the indigenous capital of Colombia, and is the founder and CEO of Fundación El Origen, which uses technology to support at-risk students around the globe. And last but not least, we have Kimball, who is a member of the Hopi tribe, and she's responsible for providing internet access to hundreds of Native American students at the Santa Fe Indian School in her capacity as Chief Technology Officer. So given the fact that you all have these wonderfully unique backgrounds and perspectives, I'd like to start by inviting each of you to share a bit about yourself, how tech intersects with your work in Indigenous communities, and your favorite part about your heritage. Robin, can we start off with you?
Yeah, so I'm Robin. I'm really excited to be here. And so my work first became or got more attention thanks to Google through their documentary Between Worlds. But prior to that, how they became aware of me was I worked on a lot of grassroots projects creating they were more community based workshops and hackathons. And then that started to get national focus and it turned into an actual event that now ACES handles every year, which is great. And ACES is the American Indian Society for Science and Engineering, which is an incredible organization. For those of you, my work regularly focuses on redefining storytelling with technology, and I work on broadening the participation of underserved communities within those creative spaces. And this ties in to my heritage in the sense that I feel like, well, as Indigenous people, we come from oral histories, and using technology is a great platform to put these histories on or to narrate them in the way that we want to, and we have ownership over this. And I'm really nervous right now, so sorry. But yeah, right now we can get more into the nebulous title of what being a creative is. But yeah, I'll pass the mic to someone else.
Thank you, Robin. Let's have Tania.
Thank you, Jessica. I'm so happy to be here. Well, about my heritage, I come from an Afro-descendant and indigenous family. So there is a mix of really strong people in my family. My grandmother taught herself how to be an educator, and she built a school at her home to provide access to personalized education for at-risk youth, mainly focusing on indigenous communities because we have the highest school dropout rates in the country. So I was inspired by her. I saw how personalized education can actually make the difference, and how can we include people from marginalized and underrepresented communities into this modern world. So I focus on developing technology. We actually started testing many platforms, like all the platforms out there, but none of them were creating engagement in the communities that we were watching. So we started developing our own technology and providing it to rural schools, organizations, and universities across the world that want to make digital education accessible, empowering, and inclusive for people from underrepresented communities. Thank you so much.
Thank you. And can we have Mina next?
Thanks, Jessica. Yes. Hello, everyone. My name is Mina Rabideaux. I'm an enrolled member of the Ojibwe tribe, specifically the Red Cliff Band of Lake Superior, Chippewa, up in northern Wisconsin, where I'm from, but currently reside and am joining from Chicago today. I'm a first-generation college attendee, graduate, corporate, and tech professional. And you'll see that kind of come through in some of my responses later. My background and expertise are in all things analytics and data, but during the equity reckoning that we experienced in 2020, I felt a pull to pursue a career closer to my outside of work passions that really center around giving back, including educational equity. So today I'm in inclusion and diversity in tech, specifically an ERG program director at Avanade, a tech consulting firm, where my main focus is increasing equity and opportunity in tech, as well as creating more inclusive spaces in the tech industry. One of my favorite parts about my heritage is how it grounds me, right? A big part of my identity is as a challenger and protector of the underserved and underrepresented. And in that space and the industry I'm in, that often contradicts with the status quo. And I sometimes fall back on my heritage and ancestors, which remind me that, I do belong here and in these spaces. This land is mine, it is ours, and no one can drive us from it or change our passion to enact change.
Thank you, Mina. And Kimball?
Good afternoon, everybody. My name is Kimball Sekaquaptewa. I am the Chief Technology Director at the Santa Fe Indian School. So I'm coming to you from Cochiti Pueblo today. I'm a member of the Hopi tribe, as I mentioned, but I'm married here in Cochiti, where I have 3 children and dozens of nieces and nephews, and then we have another generation where there's dozens in them. So if I were to lead with what inspires me and what's my favorite thing about the community, it's family and how we participate and our family together, our extended family and the community members and their families, and we come together in celebration and tradition. And it's a place where you don't lock your car. It's a place where your neighbors are there for you. It's a place where we have that identity and carry on the traditions of our family, and we do that by having strong, healthy communities. And that means a lot of things with culture, but it means a lot of things with economic opportunities and especially educational opportunities. So I think that's what, has inspired my work. And I, serendipitously arrived in technology, but there was so much to be done with the native language content creation, that Robin described, and then getting to, some of what Tania hinted at, that the technology wasn't there for us. So we had to create it and decide how we were going to use it for good. So right now in the United States, New Mexico is 49th for broadband and 50th for education. So we need some bold action. And the way that I've contributed my piece to solving that puzzle is to work on digital equity issues through creating and providing internet access. And for tribes to be our own solution to the digital divide. So real quick, Santa Fe Indian School is owned and operated by the 19 Pueblos of New Mexico. We serve the 19 Pueblos, Apache and Navajo students in an off-reservation boarding school format. We are a tribally controlled school, so we do have the latitude to create a curriculum that is going to best meet our students and our community needs. So for me with technology, we let in, we have the cell phones. We're watching a lot of Netflix, and I love myself Netflix, so I'm not going to judge there. But we're not using it for good. We're not using it as much as we need to for community development, for creating, for having our economic enterprises stronger, for having our environmental departments collaborate, for the telehealth and the distance learning. So putting in this infrastructure was necessary so we could get to the fun stuff, so we could get to the content creation and the digital language revitalization. So that's where I'm coming today from. Hopefully I can share on what putting in that broadband infrastructure has meant in our communities and for our students.
Thank you so much. I really appreciate you all's introductions. And to jump right into my first question, I know that, we spend some time up front really trying to understand what would be a question that can provide a understanding of what are some of the barriers that, Indigenous communities are facing in getting access to the tech sector, specifically on reservations. This question is specifically for Mina, Kimball, and Robin. If any one of you can jump in at this point.
I can jump in first. Access, lack of experience. When we look at, and I know you guys in this room probably are more versed with the statistics, but I know at our feeder schools coming in off the reservations, very few of them teach science, or have STEM or CS education down at like upper elementary. So how are we even expected to be able to compete with our connected non-tribal peers who have this depth of experience from a young age? It's great that we have more computer science. I know we teach it in our high school, and at that junior, senior level, you can have that. But if our students were growing from a much earlier age, then I think that we'd be looking at a whole other scenario. So I know ACES, as was mentioned earlier, has really taken on computer science, especially for Native girls recently through an NSF grant. But we just really need to be introducing our kids to these experiences. We're having a huge setback with COVID. Our schools for the low income serving communities were the hardest hit when we went out to virtual, because there was a lack of devices, there was the lack of internet connectivity. And then when those two could be addressed and mediated in some Band-Aid way, there was a lack of pedagogy. So our teachers didn't necessarily know how to teach through technology, and our students and their families didn't know how to support their students or learn through technology. So we're looking at a situation that wasn't great before COVID that really was made more challenging. And I think we're going to be looking at it for the next generation in the Indigenous communities around where I live, at least. And so I think we need some bold actions.
I would say it's like, to jump on what Kimball has said, it's also an infrastructure problem beneath that, where we're dealing with, there's some reservations, the Navajo Nation, for instance, in 2019, 15,000 homes got electricity for the first time. So when you're talking about a digital divide that includes lack of access to electricity or lack of that in the household, how do we address that? How do we get Wi-Fi to these communities? People are talking about, well, we have to get them on this program and get them to teach coding. Well, we also have to get access to these resources in the first place. And then we also have to see this represented in the community. It's one of the biggest issues that I think that I run into when talking to Native youth about getting involved in tech. It's like, well, great if I get this degree or I pursue this, but how is this going to affect me on the res? Because that job, they may not see it evident on the res, or a way that it can be implemented within their community. So I think it's attacking it from a lot of different ways, from the social way and also just from infrastructure building. I'll pass to Mina.
Yeah, I absolutely agree with both of you. And to expand on kind of where you left off, Robin, I think there isn't a path to tech. right? If you can't see it, you can't be it. That is absolutely amplified on the reservation, where, if you've been to the reservation, especially, where I'm from, there's not businesses, much less tech companies out there for them to look at, drive past and say, that's where I want to work, or to have those professionals come into schools. That's just not something that is available at all. So it's about creating that path to tech, and for folks like us to be more visible like we are today, to talk about our journey to it, how we found out about it, and pass on more of those resources to our youth, to teach them about also these highly lucrative careers that can change the economies of entire families.
Mm-hmm. If I could tag on one thing, I know I had my turn, but yeah, like not only can tech enable us to grow some of those small businesses. I know in COVID, with artisans being shut down, the ability to scan a document and submit a high resolution file for a show or in a digital space, that's huge. That's transformational in and of itself. But once we can get high-speed internet in our homes, we've just opened our homes up to a digital economy. And if those jobs are technology-based, we know that those jobs are growing. We know that they're higher salaries. So we add to that family and community well-being. But we also don't necessarily have to commute. And what has been a great detractor from our communities, let's say, over decades, maybe since the cash economy, the 50s with the TV, is that we were agricultural here. We were growing, we were self-sufficient on the whole. And then all of a sudden we needed to not live in our adobe homes, which were cool in the summer and warm in the winter, and maybe living in a trailer, which, was inefficient and cost money for gas, and we needed the gas to drive to town for our low income job. But more importantly, we weren't tending to the fields, and we weren't with our grandparents where you have that language transmission. So it really took away this having to go to town and commute to work. Really, we paid great, we paid a great price for the cultural continuity of our communities. So this work from home opportunity, if it's in the tech space, is something that I would say on the whole, we haven't had access to in the pueblos in New Mexico. But if we could, that is just, that would be game changing.
Thank you so much. Tania, I know that, your work spans the United States and internationally as well. I'm wondering if you can share a little bit about barriers to access for Indigenous communities getting into the tech sector for the work that you're doing specifically with your organization in Colombia.
Yeah, well, we started, we don't create content, we partner with universities and companies that have those job opportunities, and then we digitalize those content to our platform so that they can access to those opportunities and also to access to high quality education. And we also train local teachers so that they can customize and create their own content so they can access to local content as well. And that's the same thing that we are doing across the world. So for me, I guess the problem might not be that they are not ready to access to those opportunities, but those opportunities are not actually being accessible for them right now. And I guess that's the problem around the world. But something that we focus on, since our students didn't know that Microsoft and those big companies existed before, we started teaching them how to build their own solutions for problems that they see around their communities. So they created small solar panels, for example, so that they can share their own tablet and cell phone so that they can access to their content and then access to the opportunities. And then we teach them how to create hydroponic system and many other let's say like technological uses so that they can see tech as something that they is not only about coding, it is also about creating solutions for their own communities, because our end goal is to create leaders to lead sustainable communities. I believe that access to those opportunities, those education, is not only to access to job opportunities in those big companies, but to build leaders that can create their own solutions and create their own companies from their own communities, so that we can actually have sustainable solutions, sustainable communities for a longer period.
I love it. There seems to be like an overarching theme here about FUBU. I don't know if you guys ever have heard of like the FUBU acronym, which is like for us, by us, but I love it and I am all for that. Mina, I have a specific question for you because you are obviously working in diversity and equity and inclusion, at a really big corporation. So a question that I have is, when you think about the Indigenous technology talent pipeline into high-paying jobs, what would you say are some of the ways in which the technology industry can improve on the recruitment, retention, and promotion of Indigenous communities?
That's a great question. And I think in order for them to improve, they need to start, right? Tech companies need to recognize Native talent. That's the first step and the only way that they're ever going to achieve higher representation. We need to get them to a point, all tech firms need to say, at this point, I'm not okay with the 0.5% Native representation at this company, the 1%, right? We see that across private colleges, as well as almost every private company in the US. You can say that this is a kind of hidden talent pool because many companies still aren't targeting Natives, but they can start today in understanding and seeing Natives as an underrepresented group and give them similar resources and visibility that they would to the Black and African American community, the Latinx community, the Asian community. They need to do the same for the Native communities. They shouldn't wait to add them in or focus on them 5 years from now. They should start that today. For many companies, they're looking at DEI, which is diversity, equity, and inclusion, for the first time. So it's a good time to start. And I'd say if any companies need help or find that extremely daunting, they should seek out these nonprofits like America on Tech, like ACES that was mentioned before. Those are some that stand out in this space. They host incredible career fairs. They have access to extremely talented, high potential talent that they can be connected to. So organizations can partner with them, they can consult them, or sponsor some of their events. So that's on recruiting, but when it comes to retention, tech companies also need to identify the Natives that they already have, right? So using that self-ID data, their employee data, to identify who are those folks, and then be intentional about career planning for them, right? So the same attention you might give to other underrepresented groups, the same career planning, we need to do that for the Native community as well.
Thank you. Agreed. And Robin, my question that's coming up is for you. My challenge a lot of times is that we talk about, what our communities don't have versus what the technology industry has that we need. And I'm actually perplexed a lot of times because I actually think the technology industry and the innovation sector misses out on us, when we're not represented in the workplace. And so my question for you is, what does the technology industry and innovation sector miss out on when Indigenous communities are not represented in the workplace? And what can allies do to be better allies?
Well, they miss out on our knowledge base, on our creativity, on our innovation across the board. And this is any group that's not represented in a place. You're missing out on this point of view and perspective. And one of the biggest issues that I see with tech organizations that come into communities that are underserved is there's often this push to like, this is how you can work for us. This is how, if you study this, you can get this job here. And we need to reframe tech as community-based and be like, this is how we can make tech work for us instead of working for tech. And then oftentimes when we're the ones in control of how we're creating a system or how we're designing something or have a say in how we're doing this, we create more ethical systems that way, and we create things that take us into account. And this isn't just tech, this is across the board. And anything that you're creating, if you're not taking into account the community that you're working for, causes these large gaps. Recently, I ran into this where they had an anonymous complaint system at a place that I was working for. And they were like, well, don't worry about it. It's anonymous. And it's like, well, if I'm the only native in the building, that's not going to work for me. And this is one of those minor things where it's like, I understand that they were just like, well, you can type an email and send this, but that's not taking into account those of us who aren't counted. How do you keep us as part of it? If you had consulted us, we would have told you that was part of the problem. And as far as making allies better allies, getting involved in the community, not expecting us to be, there's this expectation that makes me kind of nervous when I walk into a place and I'm oftentimes the first native that they've met or the first indigenous person, which is really frustrating. And I'm sure all of us have been through this. And it's really you're expected to be the historian, you're expected to be the professor, you're expected to have this entire job on top of your job. And that's something that companies and allies can start doing the work on their own. I understand there's always going to be, that's just part of human nature, is being curious and wondering and not knowing certain things and asking people about them. But they can take that first step in trying to educate themselves and at least have that understanding of where we're coming from. And then also, while I have this time, I would just like to throw out a couple of other organizations aside from ACES that are incredible and that are, there's Natives in Tech, which is super helpful. There's American Indian Higher Education Consortium, known as AHEC, which is really helpful. There's the American Indian College Fund, which does a lot more research-based and data, and I don't think they often talk about that side of things, but they're a great resource to utilize, because that's another thing is, on top of being historians in this, we have to always present data to people, because people are like, well, I wasn't sure this was a thing. And then they're almost countering you in some way. And so you have to come up and have to know these facts usually of what communities you're talking about. And the diversity in Indian country is so large that there's no way that one native is going to know about all of it. In fact, I can't speak for any other tribe. I can't speak for any tribe. I can only speak for myself. I should have clarified that from the beginning. But yeah, I'm excited to be here, and thank you.
Of course. And my next question is for Kimball. Obviously you have done a lot of work in bringing connectivity to students in the work that you're doing as CTO. And I'm curious if you can just share a little bit about what governmental and corporate institutions can do to support success in the tech world for Indigenous communities.
Sure. Mina might have to help round out the corporate piece to this, but when we were a little bit lucky here at Santa Fe Indian School, because I started the broadband work about 2008, 2009. So when we came into COVID, where we found the digital divide was more of a digital chasm, maybe it was narrower, but it was deeper. So the price for being on the other side was just so much greater. We work with leveraging federal funding opportunities to the FCC, one specifically called E-rate. It's through the education rate through the schools and libraries division there. And we were able to build 2 60-mile fiber optic networks connecting 6 pueblos across the state back into Albuquerque. And when we did that, we circumvented the last mile providers who were underserving us, who weren't building out their networks because we didn't have the money, we didn't have the population density to make it worth them building out to us and essentially cutting off our communities. At that time, one pueblo, they're small pueblos, but they're independent sovereign nations. The whole government was operating off of a T1, which is about 15 to 25% of my iPhone for the entire government and the public library. So that was unacceptable at the time. And we were able to put in those 2 networks and continue to grow. We've also put in, we're helping 6 tribes putting in residential internet access using wireless technologies. And why I'm mentioning this is because there's a myriad of ways in which the government is involved in those processes. So sure, it's the federal funding opportunity. Those comes with rules, those comes with strings, but they also come with the need for policy and involvement and getting to know both your state and federal policymakers, your congressional delegations, people you don't normally work with, like state cabinet secretaries. And the way that they help you is there's a lot of good people out there. There's a lot of people that see how solving broadband, providing broadband for everybody across the United States, solving the rural the rural lack of connectivity, which we all know, but also the urban deserts. We know there's a lot of pockets that aren't connected in urban areas as well, is by creating these contiguous systems and working together, because it's a pretty complicated response. It's a complex response to address the underlying issues of why we aren't connected in the first place. So for advocacy, there's tribal engagement that gets put out by when they're going to go into a rulemaking, at federal agencies and the states as well. And you need to write those letters and you need to get involved, because you can change the rules. If the rules have been working against you, then make them better. And you make them better by creating those allies in places where you didn't think you had them before. So just real quickly, one example of that is when we, the recent 2020 tribal broadband priority for what we call the 2.5 gigahertz spectrum. So if you were to look at the FCC spectrum map, you'll see hundreds of little rectangles, and each one of those is a band. And they represent the way that the airspace above us is sliced and diced and leased out to carriers to provide internet access. We as tribes don't have sovereign control over that natural resource, arguably, like we do our water. So we would have had to bid on it, and it's very difficult to participate in FCC processes. You need attorneys, you need somebody who really can have the time and the staffing to navigate their processes, to work with the attorneys. You do need some lobbying, involvement. So the barriers of entry to participate in those systems can be quite high. So but we need to do it. And one example is that we actually had a tribal priority window with this 2.5 spectrum. It was the first and only time it's been done by the FCC. Of the tribes that were eligible, you had to be a rural tribe and you had to have unlicensed 2.5 spectrum above you to be eligible. And next year, or this year, I guess already, it's going to go out to public auction. So it was our opportunity to reclaim this airspace, to take our own sovereign control and self-determining, our own opportunities, realizing our own opportunities within telecommunications. Over 400 tribes applied. It was a tremendous response, and most of those applications were awarded. But where advocacy continues to play an important role is, I just told you about all those hundreds of little boxes and all those 100 bands. Well, every time the FCC has a public auction, they should have a tribal priority window. And unless we go out there and tell that to them, they will likely not do it or not remember. We can't assume they're going to work in our best interests. So it's very critical to work through the policy and advocacy mechanisms with government to support our success in this technology space as tribes. And for corporate institutions, I'm seeing a couple different levels, and I'm very ground roots and very I'm the one out there hiring an unemployed community member, teaching them how to drill holes in their walls, penetrate walls to hang up like internet antennas, right? So I have a broad range of outcomes that I'm trying to seek. But we have the reason we need to do that. Not only was it a good short-term solution for unemployment during COVID, but we need to build our tribal capabilities within as internet service providers, now that we increasingly have access to own and operate this infrastructure. So we're going to need techs, we're going to need management staffs, and those management staffs need to think about CapEx and OpEx. They need to, think about some cybersecurity and a whole other set of things that are their managerial and not just on the technology side. Now that we're in this tech space, increasingly cybersecurity is huge. Those are really expensive FTEs. We're small communities. Not everybody can afford one, but if we started working together and centralizing some of these domain services, these network services through our network designs, then we can centralize these really expensive functions, and then everybody's going to benefit through economies of scale. So I think working with our corporate institutions for getting more of our people the jobs, and if it needs to start at internships, and we need to build up local New Mexico companies because there's not enough of them either, then, you know, as together as a technology community in New Mexico, then we can start lifting up our tribes and community members as the owners and operators of those operations.
Thank you very much, Kimball. That was a very thorough response. I'm over here like, I have to come back to this recording.
I started taking notes too.
I love it. And Tania, you know, your work, what I love about it is that you are working with young people. And I'm curious to know, you know, for some of the young people that might be on the line or will watch this later, what would be your advice to aspiring young Indigenous people who want to access careers in technology because they got some kind of visibility into it in order for them to actually succeed in the space?
Yeah, well, I think as I already mentioned, we have to put that spark in there. Like, they have to see technology around there. They have to see that technology, again, is not about just coding. It is like just creating solutions. Technology is bigger than just coding and programming. So I think, well, I can't say that's the actually formula to do that, but for me and all the communities that we have been working on across the Global South, just showing them that they are capable to do solutions, to create solutions by themselves, by their own hands, is just like it just brings hope for them, so that they can see that they can be like they belong to this modern world, you know, like they belong to this. They can be a person that is leading a tech company in the future. They need to feel like they can do that. So we should start by showing them that they can create solutions. It can be small solutions in their communities, but just to show them that technology is accessible for them and they are capable to do so. I think that's my biggest advice.
Thank you, Tania. And my next question is actually for each of you. I know that some of you have shared some of the organizations that people should look into and possibly partner up with. I'm wondering if you have any other resources that you might be able to point the audience to as it relates to keeping up with trends on how Indigenous communities are interacting and engaging with the digital world. And anyone can pop in on this question to kick us off.
I'd say one thing that employers and businesses can do to be more inclusive to hiring this community is to change up their view of what a tech professional looks like and what type of education and training or experience looks like. So, you know, folks in our community, we might have gone to a tech boot camp and received the same training, have the same expertise as someone who went to a 4-year college or has a bachelor's and master's degree. So I think employers also have to get creative and more inclusive on the experience that they're requiring for some of their tech roles, because this is something that can be taught on the job as well.
Anyone else want to answer that question? Oh, go ahead, Kimball.
Oh yeah, well, I do agree with Robin about Natives in Tech, which is a community that I recently got to meet, and that was a really nice intersection of like the big companies and then some really culturally responsive technology kind of work products. I was excited about that. I think we need to work with our tribal colleges and uplift them in these conversations. I think they're a great partner for workforce development, which on the whole, we're not just going to be enrolling students in, we're going to be building. There's a lot of federal opportunities. Oh my gosh, you know, broadband and getting internet access to the communities was hard before. And now that all this money has come out, that scramble to get the money made it's changed the course of it, and it's not made it easier, I don't think. But there's a lot of opportunities, and there's a lot of, I'm seeing, at least in New Mexico, the higher ed, even like the nonprofit STEM and the K-12 communities coming together with the National Research and Education Networks to collaborate on solutions in this space, whether it's for workforce development or innovation. So I'm excited to see how these relationships are going to blossom. And I know we're all out there forming coalitions and jumping in because there's just so much money out there. But I would encourage you guys to look around the room and maybe peek around the corner outside of our normal silos and see what opportunities that there might be around you.
To jump on Kimball's point about tribal colleges, and also to back up what Mina's saying about looking to other avenues of methodology, because it's often accepted that you have to get a computer science degree in order to go into computer science. That wasn't my route. And I think for a lot of Indigenous folks, there's a totally different route you can take, and it can start from what are you interested in and how do we build this out? Because everything can relate to tech in a way. It's just, how do we make this happen? And a lot of tribal colleges they're also underserved by governments around them. They're also underserved, not necessarily by the tribe. They don't have, and people forget the first tribal college opened in 1969, and as a tribal college, not to count IAIA and Haskell. And so a lot of these tribal colleges are just getting their degree programs off the ground. So working with them to develop this, and a lot of having these internship programs that can take people from the school and meeting them where they're at and not discouraging them along the way, because that's another thing. A lot of students will get discouraged because they're like, well, I don't know this. And that shouldn't leave you out of the conversation at all when it comes to tech. In fact, it should allow you to think of, well, how do I reach this person and how do I show them that tech can work for them? And then also, as we're adding on organizations, another great one is SACNIS, Society for the Advancement of Chicanos and Native Americans in Science. There's also CS-STEM. I'm sorry, there's so many organizations. I can send you guys a list as they come because I feel really bad. There's Girls Who Code, which is incredible. But yeah, thanks.
Tania, did you have anything to add?
I think you guys have already said all of what I was thinking.
Awesome. And my last question for the panel, which was not in the brief, but it actually just got my wheels turning. I have a question. When you think about the year 2050, like let's think about like 29, 30 years from now, what do you want to be able to say about your communities and their access to the future of work? And we can start with anyone on the panel.
I would like to see that fluidity of natives feeling comfortable in that tech space and feeling like they have ownership of the tech, and not just feeling, actually having the ownership of tech, actually having the ownership of their narratives and their stories. I think that's something that we're seeing now, but this is something that should have happened. And yeah, I can't fathom that far ahead in the future, but that's at the bare minimum what I would like to see.
I'd like to jump in build on what Robin said, because that is so important, that point of content creation, and actually why I started building networks, because all we wanted to do at Santa Fe Indian School was use video conferencing, back in 2010-ish area, to bridge back to our students, because our languages are largely unspoken, so you're not going to get it out of a book. And then being in Santa Fe, disconnected, far away from our home communities, it's very hard to get a native language teacher if someone calls in that day. So it was such a no-brainer to use video conferencing out to the communities, and in that process to use multimedia, because we could, animate our own oral traditions and have our little kids consuming that. And then, our older kids might be the creators of it, right? And where they're a little bit older and not taking up the language as quickly. And then over time, there's more products to consume in our language. And then the younger kids, as they get better, their content creation skills increase. So we see the spiral both of language and content capabilities and multimedia going up together. But utilizing technology, so for us to have a voice in the digital space is huge. We're not just consuming, what others tell us is success, whether it's material or imagery or being, I think I used the example Baywatch before previously, Baywatch beauty. We define that. We set our own standards and we use the digital space to solidify, our identity for others, but also use it to reach our own community goals as authors kind of our destiny in that way.
I think 50 years from now, I would just like to see greater cultural awareness to across the nation and have allies who take that upon themselves to learn so that some of that emotional labor isn't constantly on us, right? So that and I'm sure you guys experience as well, I'm not the one debunking stereotypes still in this day and age. And clearing up those misconceptions constantly as the only native in the room very oftentimes. And I'd love to get to a day where that's not happening.
I think something that I would have loved to see, but I still want to see is that, we are very innovative, we are creative, and we can build solutions from the ground. So I would like to see more young people, back then and now, more young people empowered to create solutions such as artisanal filters to access to clean water, and those kind of solutions that are actually tech-based, but they don't know, they don't have the information to learn how to build that by themselves. So that we can invest more in young people from the communities to solve their own problems, instead of bringing very expensive solutions to the communities that are not sustainable. So yeah, I would like to see more young people in power, building their own solutions.
Thank you. And now we are going to jump into a Q&A. So our audience members, feel free to drop any questions that you may have into the chat. One of the questions that we had was, as a Navajo/Hopi descendant, our great grandfather took us off the reservation in the hopes that we got an education and wish that one day return to the reservation to help. What is the biggest obstacle that is stopping the progress? And Kimball, I see that you took a shot at answering the question in typewritten form. I'm wondering if maybe you can more verbally say it so that those watching the recording who won't have access to the chat can also know what your response was.
Okay. Well, we do our, we tell in my generation, I know my parents, and my grandparents were, speak English, go get an education, and then come back to the reservation. And I think that's changed a little bit in terms of we want our kids to speak their native language and get an education, but without that necessarily having to leave part if at all possible. But then I also see, and I think our other panelists on here can round this out, but sometimes it's hard to come home. And I know right now in our communities and even in New Mexico, there's just a lot of brain drain. They go out and then they have the opportunity for high paying jobs elsewhere, and we don't have those jobs. So we're going to have to find a way to create those jobs to entice our qualified, educated, awesome Native children to come home.
Other question, if no one else wants to jump in, I'll ask some other questions in the Q&A. All right, I will take that as silence. That silence as a no. Another question that's in the chat is, how can tech be used to empower young Indigenous people? And what are some misconceptions about Indigenous communities and technology that you'd like to clear up?
I think the core of tech is just sort of fiddling. It's more of a tool, I've always viewed. I mean, granted, I don't want to state this as a fact, but it's always more of a tool. And so anytime you learn something, I remember the first time and how I got into tech in the first place, and I believe this is similar for you, Jessica, too, where I just wanted my MySpace to be sparkly. And so I learned HTML. And then you learn but I remember feeling like I accomplished something. And then as I learned more things and I was able, I was only learning them because it's like, oh, I want this to do this. I want this picture to move. And same thing, a lot of kids that are on TikTok nowadays they're understanding tech and processing it in a way that shows a fundamental understanding. And that encouraging them to continue doing that, sort of congratulating them for doing this instead of it's because we may not understand or somebody may not understand what they're doing and sort of chiding it as you're wasting your time. It's like, no, like, good on you for pursuing this. You were curious about it and you made this work. How can we harness this further? And I think, well, this just goes back to more of a social issue, which is, I think oftentimes instead of pushing us to be something off the res or pushing us to be this idea of what we should be, kind of being okay with where we're at and meeting us, and not saying okay with where the reservations are at or okay with where the government and treaties are at or policies are at, but being okay with how we're processing tech. And I don't know, that's kind of a really rambly answer, but the point is, I think a lot of kids are already there and they're just not aware that they're utilizing tech and they're not being encouraged further in that sense. So that's where I would start.
Anyone else?
I think one misconception that definitely irritates me in regards to this topic is that, Native kids go to school, all Native kids get free college. They have like free rides, access to all of this funding. That's just not the case. Something, Robin touched on earlier, there's so much diversity within this community. And recognize that is a stereotype that we need to stop repeating. Just full stop.
Mm-hmm.
For sure.
Yeah, and maybe it's not a stereotype, but looking at our path, the way that we go to college. Like if we as a community, and I know we're all different, but around here we see kids, the ones that go to college right after high school, they might go a year or go 2 years and then stop out and maybe have families or kids and then go back like 4 or 5 years later. So how do we look at the education system? And it's good, those little babies and being close to the family and being young with their grandparents, there's that whole Indigenous education that they're getting. We want them to have that. That's not a bad thing. So how do we modify the educational system or the support with scholarships or, the school side of things to acknowledge the way that they're learning in various ways at the same time?
For sure. Another question in the chat is, what's the most exciting way tech has been used to benefit the community? And how do you see tech being further utilized in the future?
I have many moments in my mind. I remember when my first students started to create their own education hydroponic system in their own school to provide vegetable and healthy food in their community, even if they didn't have access to water. So it was really inspiring for me. It was wonderful. It was back in 2015 when I was doing my research. So I just felt like they are not given the opportunity to see themselves going further what they see around. So I think tech can empower them, like to build things, like they like to build things, and we are really creative. We really like to innovate. We have been innovating for many, many years. So we need to empower them to create solutions and to build. So that's the most exciting thing about technology, that they can see what they are creating.
Anyone else? Okay, well, that doesn't look like we have any more questions from the audience, but I would love if you all could just spend 1 minute each just sharing what your hope is after today's discussion. Like, what is the one thing you want to make sure that all attendees or anyone who watches this session has learned and has left with after today's panel? And Mina, maybe we can start with you.
Sure. I hope that we're leaving the audience today, especially if there's any students on or folks looking to get into tech, just to feel a little bit inspired. It's an industry with so many barriers that can be extremely isolated when you're trying to enter it. But you can see there's a lot of people really passionate about building up that pipeline and breaking down those barriers on behalf of the community.
Kimball?
I would start by modifying a previous answer and mentioning resources. I would say look to Native organizations, because we have solutions that come from within our communities. So they're going to be, those ideas are going to be spot on to what can really help us the most. So maybe it's not exclusive work just with Native organizations, but definitely involve us. I guess for me, I want to do all the cool things, in the room, and until we get that internet access, affordable, high-speed internet access, we're just out. So, our solution was not overnight, but what it really did was demystified the internet. When I think of the internet, I think of spools of plastic pipe that you put in the ground and connect with boxes every 1,000 feet or so. You can do it. Like, think about your handy, that family member who, likes to fix motors on cars or go fixes the plumbing when something goes out. Same stuff, nothing more. So if you want to be that solution to the digital divide, you can. And you should go for it, and feel free to reach out to me if you want to learn more on how we did it.
Thank you. Robin? Oh, Tania.
No, go ahead, please.
Okay.
Well, for people that are trying to get into tech or interested in getting their community or their families into tech, I would say just be easy on yourself. There isn't, and don't think about it like you have to be doing this exact thing. You have to be attending all these workshops. You have to. I would come at it from a more of what are you interested in and how can tech work for this? And then for organizations or industries that are interested in, companies that are interested in working with Indigenous groups and Indigenous tribes, one, always consult the tribe first and listen to what the community wants and start that way. And then two, this is more of a basic fundamental. Anytime you're working with tribes, don't give up on us. Continue calling. Sometimes we're under-resourced. Sometimes it's a matter of just cold calling continually. I promise you they're not purposely avoiding, for the most part, your calls. We're understaffed and under-resourced.
Yeah, community-based solutions. We have something in Colombia, well, in the indigenous region, that is called the Yanama, where you create a circle with all the community members, and then you start designing things. And that's the way that I developed the first prototype for my platform. We designed it all together. Like, I want it offline. I want it to look like me. I want it to speak like me, like those kind of things. And then we started collecting those, and then build something that was actually useful for the community. And then that's the same process that we are doing with each community that we arrive. We work directly with the community, and it is not me, myself, developing a tool for a large community, but a personalized solution at a global scale. So building solutions from the community is the key to create sustainable projects.
Well, that wraps up today's discussion. Mina, Kimball, Robin, Tania, I just want to thank you so much on behalf of America on Tech for participating in today's session. As the CEO of the organization, I think I speak on behalf of all of us when we say that we really much appreciate your time, your talent, and your expertise. And for those of you who attended today's session, I want to thank you so much for registering. You know, we're going to follow up with the recording. Make sure that you share the session far and wide. And I am wishing everyone a really awesome couple of weeks as we end the year. Thank you so much. And I will see all of you very soon.
Thank you.